That night, I looked Richard in the eye. The silence inside me cracked. But before I reveal what came after, I must take you back deeper, to the roots that shaped me, the hidden wounds that made me the woman who stayed silent for so long. Because you see, stories like mine don't begin in the moment of abuse. They begin much earlier, in the quiet lessons we are taught as children, in the fears we are forced to swallow, in the silence that becomes second nature. When I was a little girl in Mississippi, our home looked neat from the outside. My father was a preacher, respected in our small town. People would nod at him on the streets, call him Reverend Collins, and trust his words like they were gold. My mother was the shadow behind him, always polite, always with her hands folded in her lap, and always smiling even when her eyes looked like they were carrying 100 pounds of sorrow. We children learned early that appearance mattered more than truth. We could be crying in our rooms, but if guests came to the house, we had to wipe our faces, sit straight, and smile as though joy lived in our bones. And if we ever dared to ask questions about the rules my father set, his leather belt would answer us quicker than his voice. It was in that house I first learned silence. Silence was safer than speaking. Silence was survival. So when I grew up, silence followed me into my marriage. I was only 20 when I married Thomas. He was charming then, tall, handsome, and with a laugh that made me feel like the world wasn't so heavy. He worked as a mechanic, and I worked at a diner. We didn't have much, but we had each other. When he asked me to marry him, I thought I was finally escaping the silence of my childhood. But silence has a way of following you. The first year was sweet. We'd sit on the porch, sipping sweet tea in the Georgia heat, watching the fireflies blink in the night. I thought happiness was ours. But then Thomas started drinking. At first, I excused it. He works hard, I told myself. He deserves to relax. But relaxation turned into dependence, and dependence turned into rage. It began with words. You're too quiet. You don't understand me. You're lucky I married you. Then came the shouting, the slammed doors, the long nights of me lying awake, staring at the ceiling, praying he wouldn't wake up angry again. And Richard, my Richard, he saw it all. He was my firstborn, the one I thought would carry the best parts of both Thomas and me. When he was little, he was kind and thoughtful. He'd pick flowers for me from the yard, bring me little notes with hearts drawn on them, and say, "Mom, you're my best friend." But as Thomas's drinking grew worse, Richard's face hardened. He was only 14 when he stepped between us during a fight. Thomas had been yelling, waving his arms, and Richard planted himself right in front of me like a shield. "Don't you touch her," he shouted at his father. I remember the silence that followed. Thomas blinked, confused, then stumbled out of the room, muttering. But Richard stayed. He turned to me, chest heaving, and said, "I'll protect you, Mom. You don't need him anymore." At the time, his words felt like a gift, a lifeline. I thought maybe, just maybe, my son would be the man his father couldn't be. But protection slowly turned into possession. Richard began watching me too closely. If I went to the store, he'd ask where I had been. If I talked to a neighbor, he'd question me afterward, his tone sharper than it should have been for a boy. He'd say things like, "You don't need friends, Mom. You've got me." I laughed it off, thinking it was teenage jealousy. I told myself he was just a boy growing into a man, confused by the storm in our house. But then came the night that shattered everything. Thomas had passed out drunk in the living room. I was in my bedroom, sitting on the bed with tears streaming down my face, wondering how much longer I could endure this life. Richard came in quietly, closing the door behind him. He sat beside me and placed his hand on mine. "Don't cry, Mom," he whispered. "You don't need him. You've got me." His words sounded different that night, heavier, darker. Before I could understand what was happening, Richard did something no son should ever do to his mother. I froze. My body refused to move. My mind screamed, but my lips were sealed shut, just like they had been all my life. The chains of silence from my childhood wrapped around me tighter than ever. That was the beginning of 10 years of abuse. 10 years of me living two lives. By day, I cooked meals, cleaned the house, and smiled when neighbors waved. By night, I became a prisoner in my own home. Richard grew older, stronger, bolder. The fear of speaking grew heavier. Who would believe me if I told them? Who would think a mother could accuse her son of such a thing? So I told myself lies to survive. I'm protecting the family. This will pass. It's better to keep quiet than to destroy everything. But silence is poison. And it was killing me slowly. One night, 10 years into my prison, I was standing in the kitchen washing dishes. The room was quiet except for the sound of water running. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could have a moment of peace. But then Richard walked in. His shoulders were broad now, his face harder, his eyes colder. He stepped closer, the same way he always did. But this time, something inside me shifted. I felt a fire rise, a defiance I had not known in years. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see my son. I saw a monster. And right then I realized the truth. The truth I had refused to see for 10 long years. That night was the beginning of my breaking point. But what happened next was far more shocking than anything before. Because the very next day, something occurred that no one in our family could ignore. The next morning, I woke up with my heart pounding, the memory of the fire in my chest still burning from the night before. I had looked at Richard differently for the first time. No longer as my son. No longer as the boy I had raised, but as a monster who had stolen 10 years of my life. I thought I would feel weak. I thought I would collapse under the weight of it. But instead, I felt something else. Anger. Real, raw anger. I remember standing in front of the mirror that morning, staring at my reflection. My face looked older, my eyes tired, my hair thinner. 10 years of silence had aged me. But beneath all of that, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, a spark. I whispered to myself, "You don't have to live like this anymore." I didn't know what I was going to do, or how I was going to do it. But I knew that something inside me had changed. Then, before I could even gather my thoughts, the event that shook the entire family happened. It was a Sunday morning. Church bells rang faintly in the distance. Thomas was asleep on the couch, snoring like he always did after a night of drinking. I was in the kitchen preparing coffee when I heard shouting from the front yard. I rushed to the window and froze. Richard was outside, his fists clenched, standing nose to nose with our neighbor, Mr. Jenkins. Jenkins was an older man who lived 2 houses down, a kind soul who always helped fix our mailbox when the wind knocked it over. He was trying to talk sense into Richard, his hands raised in peace. But Richard was wild, his voice booming, his face red with fury. "You stay away from my mother," Richard screamed. My blood ran cold. Jenkins looked confused. "What are you talking about, boy? I only asked your mom yesterday if she needed help carrying groceries." But Richard wasn't listening. He shoved Jenkins hard in the chest. The old man stumbled back, nearly falling. A small crowd of neighbors began to gather, whispering, watching the scene unfold. My heart dropped. Richard wasn't just controlling me inside the house anymore. He was exploding outside for everyone to see. I rushed out the door, my hands trembling. "Richard, stop it. Please stop." But he turned to me with those cold eyes, his chest heaving. "He wants you, Mom. I won't let him take you from me." The words sliced through me like knives. The neighbors gasped. I felt my knees weaken. For the first time, the truth I had been hiding in silence was slipping out, not through my lips, but through his madness. I dragged him back inside before anyone could ask questions, my hands shaking so badly I could barely close the door. My heart raced as I realized what had just happened. The walls I had built to hide my secret were crumbling. Richard's obsession was no longer just mine to carry, it was spilling into the open. That night, he came into my room again. I sat on the bed, stiff as stone, and whispered, "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed us in front of the neighbors." But Richard only smiled, a twisted smile I will never forget. "Don't worry about them, Mom. They don't matter. You're mine. Only mine." And for the first time, I truly feared he might not stop until something terrible happened. Because if he could shove an old man in broad daylight, what else was he capable of? I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, knowing deep down that a storm was coming. And I could no longer hide in silence when the thunder finally broke. But what happened just 3 days later was worse than anything I had ever imagined. Because that was the night Richard did something that made me realize he might destroy not only me, but the entire family. 3 days after Richard's outburst with Mr. Jenkins, the storm I had been dreading finally broke. It was late at night, the house was quiet, and the younger kids were asleep. Thomas had passed out drunk again on the living room couch, the smell of whiskey filling the air. I was in my room, sitting on the edge of my bed, clutching my Bible. I wasn't even reading it. My hands were shaking too much. I just held it against my chest, whispering prayers I wasn't sure God was listening to anymore. That's when I heard footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate. My heart sank. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Richard. He walked in without knocking, his face shadowed by the dim light in the hallway. He stood in the doorway, staring at me with that same look, the one that made my blood run cold. But this time, something was different. His hands weren't empty. He was holding Thomas's old hunting rifle. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My body went numb. "Richard," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Put that down." He shook his head slowly. "I'm tired of him, Mom. He doesn't deserve you. He never did. Tonight, I'm ending it." The room spun around me. My son, my firstborn, was standing there, telling me he was going to kill his father. I stood up quickly, my knees almost buckling beneath me.
"No, Richard.
"Please, listen to me. You can't do this." But his grip on the rifle only tightened. His eyes burned with a dangerous fire. "He hurts you. He doesn't protect you. I will. I'll take care of everything." I felt my stomach twist. All the years of silence, all the nights of abuse, all the times I had told myself I was keeping the family together, they all led to this moment. My silence had grown a monster so big, it was about to destroy us all. I stepped closer, tears streaming down my face. "Richard, if you love me, if you really love me, you'll put that gun down." For a moment he hesitated. His eyes softened, just a flicker, as if he was torn between the boy he used to be and the monster he had become. But then Thomas stirred in the living room, groaning in his drunken sleep. The sound seemed to snap Richard back into rage. He turned toward the door, raising the rifle.
"No."
I screamed, grabbing his arm with all the strength I had left. The gun went off. The blast echoed through the house like thunder. The younger kids woke up screaming. Thomas jolted awake, confused and terrified. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. My ears rang as I clutched Richard's arm, my whole body shaking. The bullet hadn't hit anyone. It had buried itself into the wall. But the danger was real. The line had been crossed. And in that moment I knew, if I didn't find a way to stop this, Richard would kill someone. Maybe his father. Maybe me. Maybe even one of his siblings. I stood there, holding his arm, staring at the hole in the wall, realizing my silence had nearly cost a life. Richard pulled back, breathing hard, his face pale. For a moment, he almost looked like a scared little boy again. But then his eyes hardened. He yanked the rifle away from me and whispered, "Don't you ever try to stop me again, Mom. You're mine. Only mine." He stormed out of the room, leaving me trembling in the darkness, my children crying in the hallway, and Thomas too drunk to understand what had just happened. That night, as I sat on the floor, shaking, holding the younger kids in my arms, I realized something terrifying. If I didn't break my silence, soon someone in this house was going to die. But breaking silence is never easy, especially when fear has been your prison for so long. And what happened the very next morning pushed me into a decision I never thought I'd have the courage to make. Because when I walked outside to get the mail, I found something waiting for me on the porch, something that told me the neighbors had seen far more than I realized. The morning after the gun went off, I barely slept. My hands still shook as I brewed coffee, the echoes of the blast replaying in my head. The children were quiet, their little faces pale. They didn't understand what had happened, but they knew something was wrong. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself outside to fetch the mail. The air was crisp, the sky too calm for the storm raging inside me. I opened the mailbox with trembling fingers, pulled out a handful of letters, and turned to go back inside. But then I saw it. Lying on the porch, tucked under the mat, was an envelope with no name, no return address. Just one word written in shaky handwriting across the front. Please. My heart raced. I picked it up carefully and slid it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The message was short, only a few sentences, but it nearly knocked the breath out of me. We see what's happening. You don't have to go through this alone. Tell the truth before it's too late. I froze on the porch, my knees threatening to give way. Someone knew. Someone had been watching. The blood drained from my face as I looked around the street. The Jenkins curtains shifted slightly. A car drove slowly past. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Did they know everything? Did they know about Richard? About the nights, the silence, the prison I lived in? Or did they only see the fight with Mr. Jenkins and hear the gunshot? Either way, the truth was leaking out of the walls of my house, and I couldn't control it anymore. I shoved the letter into my apron pocket and hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. My hands shook so badly I dropped the letters on the floor. That afternoon, Richard came into the kitchen while I was cooking. His eyes scanned me carefully, like he could sense the fear I was carrying. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked, his voice calm but sharp, like a knife. I swallowed hard. Nothing. Just tired. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're not lying to me, are you?" My throat tightened. For years, I had lied to myself, but lying to him felt like walking on a blade. I forced a smile and shook my head. "Of course not." He stared at me for a moment, then smirked and walked away. But I knew he didn't believe me completely. That night, I pulled the letter out again and read it under the blanket with a flashlight, my hands trembling. Whoever wrote it was right. If I didn't speak, if I didn't act, tragedy was coming. But fear still gripped me. My mind kept circling the same questions. What if no one believes me? What if they blame me? What if Richard hurts the children? Or worse, if I tell? The weight of those thoughts pinned me to silence once more. And yet, something inside me began to shift. For the first time, I realized I wasn't entirely invisible. Someone outside these walls saw me. Someone knew I was drowning. But as that fragile hope flickered inside me, Richard's grip on me grew even tighter. Because 2 nights later, he did something that shook me to my very core. He came into my room, not with anger this time, but with a ring. A golden band he had taken from Thomas's drawer. He knelt down in front of me, eyes burning with obsession, and whispered, "You're my wife now, Mom." Not his.
Mine.
The sight of that ring in his hand, the sound of those words, that was the moment I realized my silence had not just created a monster. It had created something even darker, something that might never let me go alive. When Richard knelt before me with that ring, the world tilted. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't even hear the sounds of the house around me. All I could see was my son, my own child, holding out a ring like a groom on bended knee. His voice was low, trembling, but filled with determination. "You're my wife now, Mom." Not his. Not anyone else's.
Mine.
My stomach twisted violently. I wanted to scream, to shove him away, to run. But my body betrayed me once again, frozen in shock and horror. I stared at that ring, recognizing it immediately. It was Thomas's wedding band, the one he had stopped wearing years ago when drinking became more important than vows. Richard must have taken it from the drawer where it had gathered dust. "Richard," I whispered, my voice shaking. "This isn't right. I'm your mother." He smiled, a smile so chilling it sent shivers through my bones. "You're more than that. You've always been mine. Dad never deserved you. None of them do. Only me." Tears welled in my eyes as I shook my head. "Please, put it away." This isn't love. This is wrong. His smile faded. His grip on the ring tightened until his knuckles turned white. You don't understand, do you? If you won't accept me willingly, I'll make sure you never leave me.
A chill shot through my spine.
His words weren't just a threat, they were a vow. I tried to stay calm, whispering softly, Richard, I love you, but as my son. That's all I can ever be for you. But those words only ignited his fury. He stood abruptly, towering over me, his face twisted with rage. He slammed the ring onto the nightstand so hard it rattled the lamp.
No, ma'am.
You're mine. And if you ever try to run from me, I swear I'll make sure everyone pays for it. Even the little ones. My heart dropped into my stomach. The little ones. My younger children. Innocent, fragile, unaware of the monster their brother had become. In that moment, fear swallowed me whole. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. My silence wasn't only about shame or disbelief, it was about survival. Richard had crossed a new line. He wasn't just obsessed with me, he was threatening to hurt the rest of the family if I ever resisted him. That night, when he finally left my room, I clutched the Bible to my chest and wept silently, my tears soaking the pages. I begged God for strength, for deliverance, for a way out that wouldn't cost me the lives of my children. But no answer came. Only silence. The next morning, I walked through the house like a ghost. Richard's words echoed in my ears with every step. If you ever try to run, I'll make sure everyone pays for it. I wanted to believe he didn't mean it, that it was anger speaking. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen the darkness in his eyes. He meant every word. Days passed, and Richard began to act differently. He was calmer, quieter, almost tender. He would bring me flowers from the yard, cook dinner when I was too tired, and sit beside me like nothing was wrong. But I knew better. The calm was only a mask. A storm was brewing behind his eyes, waiting for the moment I slipped. And then one evening, he crossed another boundary. He walked into the living room while I was folding laundry. The younger kids were sitting on the floor, watching cartoons. He sat down beside me, placed his hand over mine, and whispered loudly enough for them to hear, "One day, they'll all know the truth about us." My blood ran cold. The children turned their heads curiously, not understanding his words, but sensing something strange. I forced a laugh, pulling my hand away quickly. "Richard, don't be silly. Go help your brother with his homework." But his eyes stayed locked on mine, daring me to deny him again. That night, as I lay awake, I realized I was trapped in a tightening cage. Richard wasn't hiding anymore. He was pushing the boundaries further, threatening not just my sanity, but the innocence of the children. And then the unthinkable happened. Because one night, Thomas, drunk and stumbling, walked into the wrong room. And what he saw that night nearly blew the entire secret wide open. It was a stormy Friday night when everything began to unravel. Rain pounded the roof, thunder rolled in the distance, and the whole house felt heavy with tension. I was in my room, sitting stiffly on the bed, while Richard paced the floor like a restless predator. I wanted him to leave. I prayed he would. But Richard stayed, muttering to himself, his hands clenching and unclenching. The storm outside felt like it was echoing the storm inside him. And then it happened. The door creaked open, and Thomas stumbled in, reeking of whiskey. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair a mess, his shirt half-buttoned. He had meant to walk into his own room, but instead, he found mine. And what he saw froze him in his tracks. Richard standing in my bedroom,
Too close to me.
his hand on my arm, the air thick with something no father should ever sense between his wife and his son. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the rain against the window. Then Thomas's face twisted with rage. "What in God's name is this?" he roared, his voice shaking the walls. My heart leapt into my throat. Richard's eyes widened, but only for a second. Then he straightened, his expression turning cold and defiant.
You don't deserve her, Dad.
You never did. She's mine now. The words sliced through the air like lightning. Thomas staggered back, clutching the doorframe for balance. You sick, twisted boy, he spat. His voice cracked with fury and disbelief. Margaret, what is going on here? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My lips trembled, my throat closed, and I stood frozen like a statue. For 10 years, silence had been my prison, and now, when the truth demanded to be spoken, my voice failed me again. Richard stepped forward, his fists clenched.
Don't you talk to her like that.
You've done nothing but hurt her. You're worthless. Thomas's face turned red with anger. Worthless? Boy, I raised you. I put food in your mouth, a roof over your head, and this is what you give me. They were inches apart now, their voices clashing like thunder and lightning. I stood between them, trembling, my hands raised as if I could stop a hurricane with my palms.
Please.
Both of you, stop. I cried, my voice finally breaking free. But neither of them listened. Richard shoved Thomas hard against the wall. The sound of his body hitting the plaster made me flinch. Thomas staggered but didn't fall. He came back swinging, his drunken rage boiling over. His fist connected with Richard's jaw, sending him stumbling back. For a moment, I thought it was over. That Thomas, even in his drunken state, would put an end to this nightmare. But then Richard's face twisted with pure hatred. He lunged at Thomas, knocking him to the ground. They struggled on the floor, fists flying, grunts and curses filling the room. Stop it. Please stop. I screamed, tears streaming down my face. But it was like shouting into the wind. Richard grabbed a broken piece of the lamp that had fallen during the fight. His hand raised high, the jagged edge glinting in the dim light. And in that instant, I realized he was going to kill his own father. Without thinking, I threw myself between them, my arms outstretched.
No, Richard. Please.
He froze, the shard trembling in his hand. His chest heaved, his eyes wild. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be flicker in his face. But then his jaw clenched, his stare turned cold again. Slowly, he lowered the shard, but his words cut deeper than any weapon. If you weren't here, Mom, he'd be dead. The silence that followed was suffocating. Thomas lay on the floor, panting, blood trickling from his lip. Richard stood over him, seething, his chest rising and falling like a beast barely contained. And I stood frozen, knowing the fragile secret I had hidden for 10 years was now cracking wide open. Thomas knew. He had seen enough. But whether he would stay silent or expose everything was the question that would change all of our lives for. After the fight, the house fell into a silence so thick it was hard to breathe. Thomas lay on the floor for a long time, groaning, his chest rising and falling unevenly. Richard stood in the corner, his fists clenched, his face a storm of rage and defiance. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, my body trembling so badly my knees nearly gave way. Finally, Richard stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The sound echoed through the house, leaving me alone with Thomas, my broken, drunken husband who had just glimpsed a truth I had buried for 10 years. He pushed himself up slowly, wiping the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, but there was something sharp behind them too. He looked at me, not with love, not even with anger, but with confusion and disbelief. What was that, Margaret? He rasped, his voice hoarse. What's going on between you and that boy? My heart stopped. This was the moment. The moment I could finally open my mouth and let the truth spill out. The chance I had begged God for, night after night, while clutching my Bible in the dark. But now, with the words right there on the edge of my lips, I froze. Shame gripped me like iron chains. Fear clawed at my chest. My voice shook as I whispered, "Nothing, Thomas. You were drunk. You didn't see straight." His eyes narrowed. "Don't you lie to me, woman."
I know what I saw.
He was looking at you, touching you, like no son should. Tears burned my eyes. I shook my head desperately. You're imagining things. Please, just let it go. For a long moment, Thomas just stared at me, his breathing heavy. Then he let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Lord have mercy. This house is cursed. He staggered to his feet, muttering under his breath as he stumbled out of the room. I sank to the floor, sobbing silently, my whole body shaking. I had done it again. I had chosen silence. But Thomas's words haunted me for days. This house is cursed. Because deep down I knew he was right. In the days that followed, the air in the house grew tense, heavy, like the calm before another storm. Thomas avoided Richard, barely looking at him, but his eyes carried suspicion every time they flicked toward me. He drank more, muttered more, sometimes staring at me like he wanted to ask questions, but didn't have the strength. Richard, on the other hand, grew bolder. He walked through the house with his head high, his shoulders squared, as if daring his father to confront him again. And at night, when he came to my room, his words were colder, darker. He's weak, Mom. He won't protect you. Only I will. Don't you forget that. And I didn't forget.
How could I?
But something inside me was changing. The spark I had felt the night I looked into Richard's eyes was still there, small but burning. Each day, it grew a little brighter, until one afternoon, the spark nearly turned into a flame. I was in the grocery store, trying to keep my head down, when Mrs. Jenkins, our neighbor, approached me. Her kind eyes were soft, but her voice was low and serious. "Margaret," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "We heard the shouting that night. We heard the gun. And we saw the way Richard looks at you. Please, if you need help, say something." My blood turned to ice. My hands trembled so badly, I nearly dropped the basket I was holding. I forced a smile, shaking my head. "You're mistaken. Everything's fine." But she touched my arm gently, her eyes filled with concern.
No, Margaret.
"It's not fine. I can see it in your eyes. You're suffering. And you don't have to." I wanted to break down right there in the store, to pour out every dark secret I had held for a decade. But the memory of Richard's threat burned in my mind. "If you ever try to run, I'll make sure everyone pays for it." So I swallowed the truth once again, whispered a shaky, "Thank you," and hurried out of the store with my groceries. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed, staring at the letter I had hidden in my apron pocket. The anonymous note. The one that said, "We see what's happening. You don't have to go through this alone. 2 warnings now. 2 open doors." And yet, I was still trapped in silence. But the longer I stayed quiet, the more dangerous Richard became. And just 1 week later, the danger exploded. Because one night, while everyone was asleep, Richard tried something so reckless, so bold, that it threatened to drag our darkest secret into the light for the entire world to see. It was past midnight when I woke to a noise downstairs. At first, I thought it was Thomas stumbling and drunk again, but something about the sound was different, deliberate, purposeful. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I slipped my feet into my slippers and crept to the stairs. That's when I saw the faint flicker of light coming from the living room. The TV wasn't on. It was a lantern. Richard was there. He stood in the middle of the room, boxes spread around him, photos scattered across the coffee table. My breath caught when I realized what he was doing, digging through old albums, pulling out pictures of me, keeping them close to his chest like a thief clutching stolen treasure. But it wasn't just the photos. He was holding my wedding dress. My wedding dress, yellowed now with age, pulled from the cedar chest where I had stored it away years ago. He held it up against his body, staring into the mirror with an expression that made my stomach twist. "Do you see now, Mom?" he whispered to his reflection. "You should have been mine from the start. Not his. Never his." My knees went weak. I gripped the banister to keep from falling. I wanted to run, to scream, to snatch that dress from his hands and burn it just to erase the horror of what I was seeing. But before I could move, the creak of another door broke the silence. Thomas. He shuffled into the room, his hair disheveled, a half-empty bottle still clutched in his hand. He froze when he saw Richard. His eyes widened as they fell on the dress. "What in God's name?" Thomas's voice cracked. "What are you doing with that boy?" Richard turned slowly, his face unreadable. He didn't flinch, didn't stammer. Instead, he smirked. "I'm showing you the truth, Dad. She was never yours. She belongs to me." The words slammed into Thomas like a hammer. The bottle slipped from his hand, crashing to the floor and shattering into pieces. I cover my mouth to keep from crying out. "Richard," Thomas's voice trembled with rage and despair. "Do you hear yourself? That's your mother you're talking about." Richard didn't back down. He stepped closer, clutching the dress tighter, his voice steady and terrifyingly calm. "She's not just my mother. She's everything you could never be. She's mine, and I'll never let her go." Thomas's face went pale. His body swayed, as though the truth was too heavy for him to carry. "Margaret, is this true?" he asked, his voice breaking. My breath caught in my throat. My hands shook. This was it, the moment the secret was about to burst open like a dam. But before I could speak, Richard dropped the dress on the floor and lunged at his father, shoving him hard against the wall. Thomas gasped, struggling to breathe as Richard's forearm pressed against his throat. "You're nothing," Richard hissed. "You've always been nothing. She doesn't need you." I finally screamed. "Richard, stop." The sound of my voice jolted him for just a second. Thomas used that moment to shove him back, gasping for air. He coughed violently, clutching his throat, his eyes burning with both fury and heartbreak. "You're sick, Richard," Thomas rasped. "You need help. God help you." But Richard only laughed. A cold, hollow laugh that sent chills down my spine. And then, with one final shove, Richard stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard it rattled the walls. I rushed to Thomas's side, my hands trembling as I tried to steady him. His eyes turned to me, filled with tears and betrayal. "Margaret, tell me it isn't true. Tell me." But I couldn't speak. My silence screamed louder than words ever could. Thomas's face crumpled, and for the first time in years, he sobbed openly. Not from the whiskey, not from anger, but from the truth he could no longer deny. And as his broken cries filled the room, I realized the nightmare had just crossed a line we could never come back from. The secret was no longer just ours. It was alive now, bleeding into the world around us, ready to destroy everything in its path. The morning after that night felt like the whole world had shifted. The sun still rose, the birds still sang, but inside our house, nothing was the same. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, his hands shaking as he lit cigarette after cigarette. The ashtray overflowed, but he didn't stop. His eyes were bloodshot, not just from the whiskey, but from crying. He had barely slept, and when he did, he woke up shouting. Richard hadn't come home. His bed was empty, the sheets untouched. His absence filled the house with a silence heavier than any scream. I moved quietly, making coffee, trying to pretend life hadn't shattered. But every move I made, I felt Thomas's eyes on me. Heavy, accusing, desperate. Finally, he broke the silence. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You need to tell me the truth. All of it. What's been happening between you and Richard?" My hands froze on the coffee pot. My heart thundered so loudly, I thought he could hear it. I wanted to lie. I wanted to brush it off as nonsense. But Thomas's face, he wasn't angry anymore. He was broken. And for the first time, I saw the man I had once married, the man who had held me gently when life was kind, the man who used to laugh so freely before the bottle stole him away. I sat down across from him, my hands trembling. Tears welled in my eyes. "Thomas, I never wanted it. Do you hear me? I never asked for it. Richard, he forced me. For 10 years, he's trapped me in silence. I've been dying inside, waiting for someone to save me." Thomas's face turned pale. He pressed his hands to his head, shaking violently. "No, no, dear God," his voice cracked as he whispered. "My son? My own flesh and blood." I sobbed into my hands. "I tried to tell you so many times, but he threatened me. He said he'd kill us all if I spoke. I didn't know what to do, Thomas. I was so scared." The room went silent except for the sound of Thomas's ragged breathing. Finally, he slammed his fist against the table so hard the cups rattled. His voice thundered. "No more. Do you hear me, Margaret? No more. He's not going to touch you again. I don't care if he's my son. This ends now." For the first time in years, fire burned in Thomas's eyes. Not the fire of whiskey, but of a man who had finally woken up. That evening, Richard came back. The door creaked open, and he walked in like nothing had happened. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, but his smirk was still there. When he saw Thomas sitting in the chair by the door, he paused, his eyes narrowing. "You're back," Richard said casually. Thomas rose slowly, his frame unsteady, but his gaze firm. "Sit down, Richard. We need to talk." Richard chuckled. "Talk? Or are you going to wave another gun in my face?" "This isn't a joke, boy," Thomas snapped. "I know everything. Your mother told me the truth. 10 years of this evil. You think you're a man, but you're a monster." The smirk faded from Richard's face. His jaw tightened, his eyes turning dark. He looked at me, then back at his father. "She told you." Thomas stepped closer, his voice sharp as a blade. "I should have seen it sooner. But I won't stand by anymore. You lay a finger on her again, and I swear I'll bury you myself." For a moment, the house went silent. Richard's fists clenched at his sides. His chest heaved as he glared at his father. And then, slowly, a cold smile crept across his face. "You think you can stop me, old man? You've been too drunk to stop yourself for years. You're weak. She doesn't need you." Before Thomas could answer, Richard lunged, shoving the chair across the room, knocking it into the wall. The force sent the lamp crashing to the floor, the light bulb shattering into darkness. In the chaos, I screamed. Thomas grabbed Richard, the two of them crashing into the table, fists flying, curses echoing through the house. Years of silence, years of secrets, years of anger. All exploding in one violent storm. And in the middle of it all, I realized something terrifying. If I didn't act now, one of them was going to die. The fight between Thomas and Richard shook the house to its bones. Furniture toppled, glass shattered, and the walls echoed with the sound of fists and fury.
"Stop. Please stop."
I screamed, but neither of them heard me. Years of silence, guilt, and rage had come to a head, and there was no stopping it. Thomas swung hard, his fist connecting with Richard's jaw. Richard staggered back, but didn't fall. He lunged again, slamming his father against the wall, his hands tightening around Thomas's throat. Thomas's face turned red as he clawed at Richard's grip. His eyes bulged, searching for air, for strength. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy glass vase, and smashed it against Richard's back. He grunted, loosening his grip just enough for Thomas to shove him off. Richard stumbled, blood trickling from his lip. He turned to me slowly, his eyes burning with something darker than anger, possession. "You betrayed me," he hissed. "You told him. After everything, you still chose him over me." My knees buckled, but I forced myself to stand tall. My voice cracked but carried the weight of years. "You are my son, Richard, but you will never own me. Do you hear me? Never again." For a moment, silence filled the room. Richard's chest heaved. His fists trembled. His eyes flickered between rage and desperation. Then Thomas stepped forward, a wooden bat gripped in his hand. His voice was steady, unshaken. "Leave this house, Richard. Tonight. If you ever come near her again, I'll kill you with my bare hands." Richard laughed bitterly. "You think you can just erase me? You think the world won't find out what's been happening here? Go ahead, Dad.
"Tell them."
See if they don't spit on both of you." The words sliced through me. He was right. If the truth came out, shame and judgment would follow. But as I looked at Thomas, battered and gasping for air yet still standing strong for me, I knew we had no choice. The nightmare had to end. I picked up the phone with trembling hands. My heart hammered in my chest as I dialed. 911, what's your emergency?" A calm voice answered. "My son," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. My son has been abusing me for 10 years. Please send someone. Richard froze, his eyes wide, as if he hadn't believed I'd ever speak those words out loud. You don't mean that, Mom, he said, his voice suddenly soft, pleading. You wouldn't do this to me. You love me. I shook my head, my grip tightening on the phone. I love the boy I raised, but he's gone. You took him away when you chose this path. I won't let you destroy me anymore. Sirens wailed in the distance. Richard's eyes darted to the door, panic flashing across his face. For the first time, he looked small, just a boy again, cornered and desperate. When the red and blue lights flashed through the window, Richard backed away slowly, his lips trembling. You'll regret this, he muttered before bolting out the back door. Police flooded the house minutes later. Questions, notebooks, flashing cameras, it was all a blur. But through it all, Thomas held me close, whispering, It's over, Margaret. It's finally over. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't truly over. The law might chase him, the world might finally hear the truth, but the scars Richard left on my soul would never fully heal. Still, for the first time in 10 years, I could breathe. And I realized something I should have known long ago. Silence is the deadliest prison. Breaking it is the only way to survive. Broken heart, and that's where the story ends, my dear viewers.
10 long years of silence, broken at last.
Remember, never suffer in silence. Speak up. The truth may hurt, but it will also set you free. The days after Richard fled the house were heavy with silence, but this time, it was a different kind of silence. Not the choking silence of fear, but the uncertain silence that comes after a storm, when you don't yet know if the skies are clear or if more thunder is coming. The police promised they would find him. They promised he wouldn't get far. But every creak in the house, every shadow outside the window, sent chills down my spine. Because I knew Richard. He wasn't the kind of man to run and hide forever.
He was the kind who came back.
Thomas stayed close to me, though the bruises on his neck and face hadn't yet faded. He held my hand every night before bed and whispered, We'll be okay. He won't hurt you again. His words were soft, steady, but I could feel the fear in his grip. One evening, about a week after Richard vanished, I heard a knock at the door. My heart jumped into my throat. Slowly, I peeked through the window, only to see a woman I didn't recognize. She looked about my age, with tired eyes and a heavy coat wrapped tightly around her. Are you Margaret? She asked when I opened the door cautiously. Yes, I said warily. She glanced around, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. My name is Linda. I need to talk to you. About Richard. My stomach dropped. What about him? She hesitated, then whispered the words that nearly made me collapse. He did the same thing to me. I stared at her, unable to breathe. The world tilted beneath my feet. Linda's eyes filled with tears as she continued. Years ago, when I lived down the street, I thought I was the only one. I thought no one would believe me. But when I heard the police were looking for him, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore.
The room spun around me.
My worst nightmare wasn't just mine. Richard's sickness, his cruelty, it hadn't stopped at me. He had spread it like a poison, touching other lives, other women. I gripped the doorframe, trying to steady myself. My voice trembled. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Her answer cut me to pieces. Because I saw how afraid you were. And because I was afraid too. Tears blurred my vision. For 10 years, I had carried my shame like it was mine alone. And now I was learning it had been heavier than I ever imagined, because I hadn't been the only victim. But before I could say anything more, before I could ask her to sit, before I could even process the truth, there was another sound. The sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. I turned my head toward the window, and my heart froze. Richard, standing at the edge of the yard, watching us. And this time he wasn't empty-handed. In his grip gleamed the cold steel of a knife. The sight of Richard standing there with a knife made my whole body lock up. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't move. My son, the boy I once rocked to sleep, the boy I once prayed over, was now a man with murder in his eyes. Linda gasped beside me. "It's him," she whispered, her voice shaking. Richard's lips curled into a cold smile. "Did you really think you could run to the police, Mom? Did you think you could betray me and get away with it?" I tried to steady my voice, but it came out weak. "Richard, please. Put the knife down. We don't have to do this." His eyes narrowed. "Don't pretend you care about me. You destroyed me when you called them.
You turned the whole world against me.
You, my own mother." His voice cracked, part rage, part desperation. Thomas rushed in from the kitchen, his eyes going wide at the sight. He immediately stepped in front of me, shielding me from Richard's glare. "You're not touching her again. Not now, not ever." Richard raised the knife higher. "Move, Dad. This is between me and her." Linda trembled, her hands clutching her coat tightly. But then, to my shock, she stepped forward. "Richard, listen to me. You did this to me too. I thought I was alone, but I'm not. You've left scars on more lives than you even realize. If you hurt her tonight, you'll carry that blood forever. Don't do it." Richard's jaw clenched. For a flicker of a second, I saw doubt in his eyes. The boy he used to be, buried deep, seemed to peek through. But just as quickly, the hardness returned. "Shut up," he barked, his voice breaking the tension like glass. He lunged forward, the knife flashing under the porch light. I screamed. Thomas grabbed Richard's arm, the two of them grappling violently in the doorway. The knife clattered against the floor, skidding across the wooden boards. "Linda, grab it," I shouted, my voice hoarse with panic. She froze for a moment, then darted forward, scooping the knife up with shaking hands. Richard noticed, his face twisting with rage. With a violent shove, he threw Thomas aside and lunged toward Linda. Everything slowed. Her scream pierced the air. My body moved before my mind could think. I threw myself between them, my hands outstretched. The knife was in her grip, but his strength bore down. And in that split second, I realized something chilling. It wouldn't matter if he had a weapon or not. Richard wouldn't stop until one of us was dead. And in that instant, I had to make a choice. Fight my own son, or let him destroy us all. The knife trembled in Linda's hands as Richard pushed forward, his weight bearing down like a storm. My arms shook as I tried to hold him back, but he was stronger, fueled by fury, by madness, by the sickness that had ruled his life for so long. "Mom," Thomas shouted, scrambling up from where Richard had thrown him. His voice cracked with desperation. "Move." But I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the ground, my heart torn in two. How could I fight my own child? How could I look into the face of the boy I once nursed, the boy I once kissed goodnight, and strike him down? Richard snarled, his spit hitting my cheek. "You'll never be free of me. Never. You belong to me, you always have." Those words, those cursed words, they ripped through me like fire. And suddenly, something inside me snapped. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I wasn't just a victim. I was a woman who had been caged for 10 long years. And I was done being his prisoner. With a scream that came from the deepest part of me, I shoved Richard back with all the strength left in my body. He stumbled, his eyes widening in shock. In that split second, Thomas lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. The two of them rolled across the floor, fists flying, growls echoing through the house. Linda backed into the corner, clutching the knife, too terrified to use it. "End this, Thomas," I shouted, my voice raw. But Richard was ruthless. He slammed Thomas's head against the floorboards, his teeth bared like an animal. Thomas groaned, dazed, his grip loosening. "Stop," I cried, rushing forward. I grabbed Richard's arm, trying to pull him away, but he twisted, his elbows slamming into my ribs. Pain shot through my chest, knocking the air out of me. He pinned Thomas beneath him, his hands wrapping around his father's throat. Thomas's face turned red, his eyes bulging. "No," I screamed. "Not again. Not ever again." Without thinking, I turned to Linda. The knife, now. Her eyes went wide. She looked at me, then at the knife shaking in her hands, then at Richard choking the life out of Thomas. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I can't." I grabbed her shoulders, my own tears burning hot. "If you don't, he will kill us all." Richard's grip tightened on Thomas's neck. I could hear the strangled gasps, see his body trembling as his strength faded. Linda froze. Then, with a sudden cry, she raised the knife high into the air. And as Richard turned his head, his eyes wild and filled with hate, the blade came crashing down, straight toward his chest. And also tells viewers to like, subscribe, and comment where they're watching from.